Hello and welcome to Tech Deals. The world of personal computers is amazing. You have choices that range from the ultra low cost to the extremely high end and everything in between. You can build a $100 used PC or you can spend $10,000 if you really want to. Thankfully, neither extreme is required to have an awesome PC experience. AMD has just launched Ryzen 7000, also known as Zen 4, and with it we have new options for PC building that offer new and improved performance for anyone looking for a premium PC experience. Today, we're going to review both Ryzen 9 CPUs, the 7900X and the 7950X, together in a single video. It didn't really make sense to us to cover them separately since they fall into the same premium high-end computing experience realm. Gaming and productivity benchmarks are included, as well as a brief overview of the new AM5 platform. This is going to be a long video, so please sit back and relax, grab a drink, grab a snack, and let's get into it. Buy Windows 10 Professional for $15, activate instantly online with Microsoft, and keep it forever. Don't pay full price. Get the best deal from our sponsor, URCD Keys, using our link in the video description below. Full details on how this amazing deal works at the end of the video. The first Zen 4 video we published was the Ryzen 7 7700X. It contains more information on the platform itself, motherboards, and different Zen 4 CPUs. If you haven't seen it, please watch it first for more information. We also have a separate video on the Ryzen 5 7600X for those of you interested in that CPU. Both will be linked in the video description below. The shortest recap ever is Zen 4 is an all-new CPU design on a brand new motherboard called AM5. This is a new socket incompatible with the first 4 generations of Ryzen CPUs, and it now uses exclusively DDR5 RAM. 2 different chipsets exist for AM5, the B650 and the X670. For Ryzen 5 and Ryzen 7, the B650 makes total sense. However, if you're going Ryzen 9, I would advise stepping up to X670 for a premium build. There is also an extreme version of both chipsets. However, this isn't a chipset review, so watch for a full chipset comparison in a future video. Today, we'll also be testing 2 of Intel's 12th generation counterparts to Ryzen 9, the i7-12700K and the i9-12900K. Part of the Alder Lake line of CPUs launched in 2021, both CPUs feature 8 performance cores, with the i7 having 4 efficiency cores and the i9 having 8 efficiency cores. This is the first hybrid desktop CPU architecture, and an interesting idea that we'll have to see if AMD counters in the future. Worth noting is this is being filmed 2 weeks before Raptor Lake launches. We will do an updated version of this video once we get a chance to test 13th gen from Intel. The Ryzen 9 7900X has 12 cores and 24 threads, while the Ryzen 9 7950X has 16 cores and 32 threads. On a per-core basis, you can assume that they are very close overall in single-core performance. The only real difference here is the extra 4 cores on the 7950X. Both CPUs have 64 megabytes of level 3 cache, which is one of the biggest differences over the Ryzen 5 and Ryzen 7 CPUs, which feature only 32 megabytes of level 3 cache. For multitasking, this extra cache can come in very handy when 2 separate programs are splitting CPU time and both have different data that needs to be cached. More on this at the end of the video. We have 2 different test machines being used to benchmark each CPU as they are on different sockets. Rather than read out a ton of numbers for the next 5 minutes, we're just putting them all on screen right here. Feel free to pause the video to read them if you like. The short version is that we have balanced each test machine to be as fair and reasonable to each CPU as possible. First, we'll start off with some productivity tests to look at the single and multi-threaded performance of each CPU. CPU-Z Bench provides a simple and easy way for you to test your PC to make sure it's running as it should. In single-core performance, the results are effectively a tie. All 4 CPUs are within the testing margin of error, and all are noticeably faster than prior CPUs from both companies. When it comes to multi-core performance, the biggest surprise for some will be the i9-12900K versus the Ryzen 9 7900X. The 16-core i9 CPU loses to the 12-core Ryzen 9, if only just. The 16-core 7950X demolishes the i9, beating it by 38%, showing that while E-cores are in fact real cores, they aren't full performance cores, and in pure multi-threaded workloads shouldn't be counted as such. Cinebench R23 is more or less a 20-minute version of CPU-Z. It is based on a real workload, however, it tends to have almost perfect core and thread scaling. The story is similar with one big difference. The Ryzen 9 7900X goes from the slowest single core in CPU-Z to the fastest single core in Cinebench. Every test and program is different. However, keep in mind that the difference here is likewise within the 5% margin of testing error, so this is still effectively a tie. The multi-thread results repeat CPU-Z, with the Ryzen 9 7900X beating the i9 and the 7950X demolishing it with a 39% lead in performance. The otherwise lovely i7 with 12 cores and 16 threads puts in a fair showing, but it cannot keep up with 12 full-power CPU cores. 7-Zip is a file compression program that has a lovely built-in benchmark. Note that if you wish to try this yourself, make sure you're using the same version we are using, version 22, because the benchmark does change between versions. AMD absolutely crushes Intel in this test, with the 7950X beating the 12900K by 84% in the decompression test. Wow, that is not a slight win. Those are in two different leagues of performance. This test tends to do very well for AMD across their CPU line. However, it is highly memory speed dependent, so keep in mind that we are using premium DDR5 6000 CL30 RAM here. If you're running DDR5 5600 CL40, you won't get these results. Blender is a great tool for testing 3D rendering performance on both CPUs and GPUs. I said in our Ryzen 5 7600 review that if you are remotely interested in Blender performance, you shouldn't be looking at a Ryzen 5 CPU. Run, don't walk, and buy a Ryzen 9 7950X. Here you can see why. The 591 point result is 56% faster than the 12900K. Finally, we have V-Ray, a 3D rendering plugin used by the biggest media companies in the world. Seen Star Wars Rogue One, Captain America Civil War, V-Ray was used to render the 3D effects in those movies. The story here is the same as Blender. If 3D rendering and non-gaming productivity workloads are your thing, Ryzen 9 7950X is your new best friend. The 7950X beats the 12900K by 59% here. I think that says all that needs to be said here. The E-cores on the Intel CPUs are great for multitasking, but they're not as good at multi-threading, at least not in real workloads. I talked about this in the last two videos, but I think it is worth saying again. Multitasking and multi-threading are not the same thing, despite the two terms being sometimes interchanged in casual discussions of CPUs. Multi-threading is when one program will use all the cores and threads you have to run as fast as possible. Some programs, such as V-Ray, will scale to thousands of cores across hundreds of machines in professional environments, such as Disney's. Multitasking is when you're running multiple completely different programs that are competing for system resources. A good example would be multiple monitors with a game running on one, a web browser open on another, you're watching a YouTube video or Twitch live stream, or perhaps you are streaming to YouTube or streaming to Twitch or recording your gameplay. The i9-12900K is a really nice multitasking CPU, but its multi-threading does not hold up outside of synthetic tests versus the Ryzen 9 with its all-performance cores. Now it's time for some gaming tests. If you have watched our prior 7600X and 7700X videos, you know the format and order to expect. Before we actually get to the games, however, I think two important points need to be said. First, all of these CPUs will play any game on the market today just fine at highly playable frame rates. This is not a video meant to tell you that one of these will somehow play games noticeably better than another. These are top-of-the-line CPUs from each company. Of course they run everything great. Second, the real question to ask is, How much reserve performance do each of the CPUs have, and what sort of multitasking can be done on each while gaming? It is important to remember that we are running these tests on completely clean test machines. Windows is freshly installed, nothing is running in the background, the task tray is clear, and no updates are running. Put a dozen things in the task tray, have Windows updates enabled, be watching a YouTube video or listening to music, or have Discord voice chat open, and you'll find your CPU load is higher than what you see here. For most people wanting a premium gaming experience, the 12700K or the 7900X is really all that you need. The primary point to the 12900K or 7950X is to gain additional multitasking abilities for live streaming or multi-monitor use with more than the usual number of background things running. Our first game is Assassin's Creed Valhalla, a very demanding title that is almost, but not quite, completely graphics card bound here. These results are effectively a tie, 134 on everything but the 7950X, and that is still within the margin of testing error. The 1% lows are better on the Intel CPUs, and the 0.1% lows are better on the AMD CPUs. However, none of these differences amount to much, 5% give or take. Battlefield 2042 is new to our benchmark suite. Several of you have requested this be added, so here it is. The CPU usage is a bit higher on the Intel CPUs, giving the reserve advantage to AMD here. The frame rate is an effective tie, however, so don't take this chart to mean more than it actually does. This brings me to a point that needs to be discussed more often with reviews: margin of testing error and live gameplay variance versus built-in benchmarks. On built-in benchmarks, any difference of 5% or less is really a tie, as you can run most tests a dozen different times and get slightly different results each time. Note that this is with MSI Afterburner testing, which does introduce some variance due to when you start and stop the test. On live gameplay, any difference of 10% or less is a tie due to the natural variance of real games being played on real servers with real people. We consider this far more realistic testing for CPUs, as it provides a real load for the CPU versus just using replay files that are effectively just watching a movie, stressing only the graphics card. The top result here is 183 frames per second on the 7900X. This is 8% faster than the bottom result of 169 frames per second on the 12700K. However, play 5 more matches on each CPU and you will find games where the results shift around a bit up and down. Call of Duty is perhaps the most popular online first-person shooter game franchise of all time, and a terribly difficult one to test in live gameplay. Here are 4 of the battles we played on a chart. Neither are the fastest or slowest results we tested. Rather, this represents a reasonable middle ground you can expect most of the time. The AMD CPUs are faster overall by a bit, however, it isn't enough to actually matter. Do note that the 0.1% low on the 12900K is an outlier of a few frames on a stutter that wouldn't remotely matter in actual play. We're including the 0.1% lows as they have been requested in the past. However, getting them consistent is really hard in built-in benchmarks and almost impossible in live gameplay. Cyberpunk 2077 really likes Intel CPUs. Look at the frame time graph on the 12900K versus the 7950X. Regardless of the frame rates, the frame pacing is simply better on Intel here. You'll find this sort of thing in some games, either Intel or AMD is butter smooth, but not the other. 200 plus frames per second on the 12900K is lovely, and it very much does beat the 7950X by almost 10%. However, once again, all of these CPUs would play this game just fine. I do think the CPU usage is interesting. Let's take a closer look at that with the 12900K on the top and the 7950X on the bottom in the bar scene. The 12900K is at about 50% usage on the CPU, while the 7950X is noticeably less occupied. While Intel is faster here, AMD has way more reserve power for other things on your PC besides just this game. F1 2022 is new to our benchmark suite, with the 2020 version finally being retired. Still very easy to run, a good test for high frame rates and making sure the 1% lows are solid. This time we see a difference worth noting, as the 7900X is 15% faster than the 12900K. Not a massive difference, but it is definitely one worth noting. Far Cry 6 is also new to our benchmark suite, finally having retired Far Cry New Dawn. This one sees the roles reversed, somewhat noticeably. Watch the frame time graph. The Intel CPUs are absolute flatlines with hardly a bump in sight. The AMD CPUs have all kinds of microstutter and jitter. Not enough to make this unplayable, far from it, but it is noticeable enough to call it out. The average frame rates are about even. However, the 1% lows aren't even close. The 12900K is 37% faster than the 7950X in the 1% low. That is a difference that will be noticeable on a high refresh rate monitor in live gameplay. This is clearly a game that was optimized for Intel, similar to Cyberpunk. Guardians of the Galaxy is another game where Intel CPUs win in both the average and 1% lows. However, this time not by enough to matter. All 4 CPUs maintain over 144 frames per second in the 1% lows, so the rest of the numbers hardly make a difference. Hitman 3 is another new addition to our testing, and this one is a whopper of a demanding game. It will use everything you've got to provide fast frame rates and smooth gameplay. All 4 CPUs provide great results for the chart, however, the actual recorded footage tells another story. The frame times are smoother on Intel, which is not reflected in the 1% and 0.1% lows, but if you watch the actual recording, you can see the difference. Still, this may be making a mountain out of a molehill. It's there, but it isn't the end of the world either. These would all be a very nice experience. Spider-Man Remastered is another new game to our test suite, and this is another game that will use almost everything you can throw at it. It runs well on all of these CPUs, and there isn't enough of a performance difference to be worth pointing out. What is worth pointing out is that the 7900X did reach 50% usage at times, indicating that all 12 cores were in active use. The 12700K passed 60% a few times, indicating that all 8 P cores and either hyperthreading or some of the E cores were in use. This is a very demanding game. If you want to do anything else while you're playing, step up to the 12900K or 7950X. Tiny Tina's Wonderlands, say that 3 times fast, replaces Borderlands 3 in our test suite, and we're mostly graphics card bottlenecked here, just like Valhalla. Even at 1080p, even on a 3090 Ti. Crazy, isn't it? The average and 1% lows are almost exactly the same. The variance on the 0.1% lows is due to run-to-run differences, so it's hard to weed these out. Don't stress at the differences here. Before we go to the 10-game average chart, I want to talk about real-world experience for just a minute. When you use as many CPUs as I do, not just in benchmarking, but in everyday use, both in our office and our home, you gain a sense of what each one can do and what to expect. All of these CPUs are fast, really fast. Windows will install quickly, games will launch quickly, updates will install quickly, Chrome will be super fast. Everything about them is lovely, other than perhaps their price tags. If you have a single monitor and you really only do one thing at a time, the 7900X or 12700K would be great choices for a premium gaming PC. Keep your task tray reasonably clean, close excess open programs, make sure you don't have anything but your game or primary program actually running, and there really isn't anything these CPUs won't do exceptionally well. Note that the same can largely be said most of the time for lower-end CPUs from either company. Ryzen 5 7600X, I'm looking at you. However, they have so very little life in front of them given the pace of development that we expect over the next 3 years. Intel's roadmap has 48 core consumer CPUs launching in 2025. That's just 3 years from now. Now, AMD has not shared their exact roadmap when it comes to cores. However, they are expected to respond with a 32-core CPU in the next 2 years on AM5, possibly Zen 5. In fairness, this makes the whole 6 versus 8 versus 10 core discussion kind of beside the point by comparison. In this reviewer's opinion, if you want a computer that's going to last for 3 to 4 years, it should not have a 6 or 8 core CPU in it today. If you have multiple monitors and you tend to run multiple programs at once, the 7950X or the 12900K would make much better choices. They will last longer, they will provide that reserve performance for background tasks, and they will age more gracefully over time. What's my advice? If you're going Ryzen, the Ryzen 9 7900X is a great CPU. It has only one real flaw, and that would be the 7950X. There is only a $150 price difference between the two CPUs. Once you account for the platform cost, new RAM, storage, and so on, what difference does $150 make? You're looking at $300 for a solid motherboard, $200 for 32 gigabytes of DDR5 RAM, $550 for the 7900X, plus the rest of the PC, not to mention what top-end graphics cards cost. For a $2,500 PC, another $150 is not going to break the bank. And if it does, you probably shouldn't be building a $2,500 PC. And it gives you more breathing room to run more programs or delay an upgrade by a year or more in the future. If you're going Intel, the 13th generation CPUs can be ordered from Newegg today. Links in the video description below. They ship on October 20th. The i5 13600K is interesting. With 14 cores starting at $310, it's effectively the same price as the 6-core 7600X. AMD, you need to lower the price of that thing. To be fair, 8 of those are efficiency cores, so their value is more in multitasking today, but over time, expect more games to better use them. Having said that, if you can afford it, I would run straight to the i9-13900K. It's the top-end CPU for the LGA 1700 platform, and those tend to hold their value over time. In fairness, it is $200 more than the i7 13700K, which I suspect a lot of people will find the real value in. However, the above math for the 7950X largely repeats here, and since there won't be anything else coming out for LGA 1700, it's go big or go home for this level of PC build. Please note, at the time this is being filmed, I have not yet actually tested the i9-13900K yet. The samples from Intel physically arrived just as I was getting ready to film this video. So I am making this video without personally knowing how well this is going to perform. Having said that, I can draw a line from A to B. It has higher clock speeds than the 12900K. It has 8 more efficiency cores than the 12900K, and it is a refresh chip that will be faster in every way. The results aren't hard to guess at. Another option is to wait for the 3D chips coming early next year from AMD. Expect those to be announced in January at CES. They will most likely cost more. However, if pure gaming performance is the goal, expect very good things from them. Here is the 10-game average chart showing all 10 games tested. We effectively have a 4-way tie when it comes to frame rates. However, as I said earlier in the video, this isn't about frame rates. It's about reserve power left in the CPU. I would encourage you all to rewatch the sections of recorded footage. It's the CPU usage percentage number that really counts. The lower the percentage, the more reserve power each CPU has for multitasking or for future games. Now I'd like to take a minute and share with you my personal upgrade plans. It's one thing to look at charts and give advice on what you should buy. It's another to ask, okay, so what would I spend my money on? The short answer is 7950X or 13900K and not much else. This generation is expensive with the release of higher cost motherboards and DDR5 RAM. If you're going to step up, step all the way up and go big. In the long run, you might be surprised to learn it doesn't actually cost more, at least on a per year basis. Your PC will last longer, so you get more value out of it over time, and you enjoy superior performance longer. You also enjoy higher resale value in the future, which if you consider that in the current price versus potential future resale, for those of you who sell your parts, you might be shocked to discover the differences are pretty minor and trivial. For those of you who doubt me, look at the launch price of a 9900K and the launch price of a 9700K. Now go look at eBay and see what they're worth today. Tell me you really spent more to buy a 9900K. Those of you who bought a 9700K, you're kind of giving it all up in its current value and the fact that it hasn't lasted as long. Go premium if you're going big. Otherwise, go budget and entry level. I will be upgrading my i9-12900K at home to a Ryzen 9 7950X, and I will be upgrading my office video editing PC from a Ryzen 9 5950X to an i9-13900K. Yes, I'm swapping Intel for AMD and AMD for Intel. However, there's a reason for that. We use Adobe Premiere Pro to edit our videos, and frankly, Adobe just likes Intel more. Also, it's easier to find Z690 motherboards with 10 gigabit networking for a reasonable price and with 5 M.2 slots on it, which is nice for all of our files. Since we have a 10 gigabit network in our office and 5 gigabit fiber to the internet, that sort of thing matters to us. Maybe not to most people, but it matters to us. My home PC was going to become a 13900K. However, I decided to switch to the 7950X because I really don't want to move to Windows 11. And for 12th and 13th gen Intel chips, you really do need to go to Windows 11 for the new process scheduler. For Zen 4, you don't, because it's good old-fashioned P-cores front to back. Windows 12 should arrive in 2024, and I'll probably skip Windows 11 and go straight there when the time comes for my personal machine, but I play a lot of older games, which, to be honest, don't remotely require a 7950X. However, Windows 11 and hybrid cores run the risk of breaking support for older software. Think 10-plus-year-old games in unexpected ways, so I'm taking the safer path with my home gaming PC. If half the games I play don't need a 7950X, why bother upgrade at all then? Great question, glad you asked. Because I run a technology review YouTube channel, and having personal daily experience with the newest stuff is important to be able to cover it, not just from a benchmark perspective, but from a real-world perspective, so here we are.
URCD Keys is the best source for genuine Windows and Office Professional product keys that work the first time, every time. Get 25% off their already amazing prices using our code TD20 and the link in the video description below. $15 gets you a Windows Professional OEM key that is a real product key and activates directly with Microsoft. Or get a full copy of Office 2019 Professional Plus for $50 that redeems at setup.office.com using your Microsoft account. Or why not both? And the nice thing, use them forever as they link directly to your Microsoft account and work through reinstalls. We have been using URCD Keys for over 3 years now and highly recommend them.
Thank you all so much for watching to the very end. 2 gold stars for all of you still here. There will be links in the video description below to both Zen 4 and 13th gen stuff. Don't bother with the 12th gen. Even if it's discounted, the truth of the matter is 13th gen is expected to be so much faster at not much more money. Why bother? Now, I legitimately have not tested this at the time of filming, so I cannot tell you that for sure. And if I had tested it, I couldn't tell you the performance because we're under NDA, but I'm allowed to show you the CPU, I just can't show you performance. What I can tell you is this: $650 for the 13900K versus $500 for the 12900K, which is what it's actually going for at the moment, $150 more. For $150 more, you get 8 more efficiency cores, you get anywhere between 500 to 800 megahertz higher clock speeds typically, and you get a refresh chip that has better optimizations and lower power consumption typically than the existing chips. We will test all of that. We will do a launch video for it. But if you're willing to spend $500 on a CPU, $650 shouldn't remotely slow you down. And if it does, with all due respect, you shouldn't be buying a $500 CPU. This is all premium stuff. If budget is a concern, just the other day for the big Prime event, the Ryzen 7 5700X was $199. 8 Zen 3 cores for $200. Seriously, that is a phenomenal value. And if money is a concern, I wouldn't buy any of these. A $99 B550 motherboard with a $200 Ryzen 7 5700X CPU, $80 of 32 gigs of DDR4 3200 megahertz RAM, you're golden. Drop a RX 6650 XT in there for $265. What do you need all this for? Play anything on the market, including Cyberpunk at 1080p just fine, and most current games at 1440p for like 25% of what building this would cost. This is for premium users. This stuff is for top-of-the-line premium users. And if you're a premium user and money is not the most important purchase decision, why in the world would you buy almost the best? Buy the best or buy value. Don't buy almost the best and not quite get there, but still spend 80+% of the money without getting the best. Thank you all so much for watching. I will see all of you next time. I like my new iPad teleprompter. It is so much smoother.
6 cores is all you need for a Recon.
That has 8 cores in it. That's an 8-core iPad.
What was the other one?
I think 4. These people who keep saying their 6-core chip is fine in 2022. Folks, our new iPad teleprompter, I just replaced it with a new iPad Air 5. It's got an 8-core CPU in it. We had an old iPad Air 2, which I believe has a 4-core CPU in it. The difference in performance in smooth scrolling and voice response, because it scrolls with my voice, is night and day. Yeah, you can use older stuff. You could use an iPad Air 2 today. But wow, the difference is dramatic and noticeable. I don't have to run any benchmarks on my iPad to tell the difference. 2 different chipsets exist for AM5, the B650 and the X670. For Ryzen 5 and Ryzen 7,
The X670.
what did I say?
That's the Z690. Should I say something?
It was going so well, too.
I know it was. I'm like, be quiet, be quiet, be quiet. I'm like, that's Two Gold Star Story.
Wow, that's so smooth. I move it here and it's instant. Honey, it's important that you put the X. I'm like, I said X670. What are you talking about, you crazy woman? All 4 CPUs are within the testing margin of error, and all are noticeably faster than prior CPUs from the... First, we'll start off with some productivity tests to look at the single and multi-thread... Take a deep breath. I mean, if you're seriously doing Blender work, there's no point in even saying anything else. It is 56% faster for basically the same... Well... It's a little cheaper now, Raptor Lake, but we'll review it when we come to live. Actually, you know what? I still think it beats Raptor Lake in Blender, even with the 24 cores. Food for thought, Assassin's Creed Valhalla, 1080p high detail, not ultra, on a 3090 Ti, still graphics card bound. We still need more graphics card performance even at 1080p for some titles. I think that result alone would shock many people.